Thank you, Scott, and thank you for the opportunity to share a bit with you today. So the title I came up with for our time together today is Thoughts on Faith, Life, and Work in a Career in Healthcare. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you today. My desire is to share some of my experiences and observations of over 22 years working in healthcare. I hope they're helpful to those of you headed toward work in the context of a medical career, like all these folks in blue scrubs. That they might also be helpful to those of you who work in other contexts, but at some point in your life will have the occasion to be a patient or a family member in a healthcare setting. I hope so. I approached this topic as a Christian who embraced a career in ministry 41 years ago now as a freshman in college. I pray these thoughts are helpful to you no matter what your beliefs or vocational calling. I have 3 degrees in theology and 3 in theology and 1 in counseling. I did congregational ministry for about 15 years, mostly with college students, as Scott alluded to earlier. Had some great experiences in church work, but I found a vocational home as a healthcare chaplain in 2002. I've mostly worked in a hospital setting. There are a broad range of other healthcare settings, as you know. But I hope this brief history gives you some idea of my experience and perspective and maybe some of my biases. I hope that my remarks will be helpful to you. They'll be relatively brief. Perhaps you've heard the old saying, there are bad sermons and there are short sermons, but there are no bad short sermons. My thoughts today are more testimonial than sermons, but I will leave time to take questions at the end, like Scott mentioned. So, first observation, working in healthcare gives you plenty of daily opportunities to serve others. Albert Schweitzer was a physician, a theologian, a musician, Nobel Peace Prize recipient, missionary to Africa, and he said, quote, "One thing I know, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve." And Jesus said of his life's work, quote, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." These opportunities to serve in healthcare often coincide with really profound times of need in others. This increases both the challenge, the stress, and the meaning of the work. The challenge and the stress come because patients and families react in a variety of ways to stress in their lives. The meaning comes in part from the privilege of caring for someone when they really need what you have to offer. And often what you have to offer makes a positive and lasting difference in their lives. The work may, not just say may, will often leave you exhausted at the end of the day. But that exhaustion is frequently paired with deep satisfaction and meaning for the opportunities to serve and make a difference that you had that day. Working in healthcare requires the ability to be both task-focused and people-focused at the same time. Almost everyone in healthcare has more work to do in a day than it's possible to complete. I hate to break that to you if you're not yet aware of that. It's just a constant function of the environment of healthcare. So it's helpful if you like to be busy. I happen to like to be busy. But there's this constant temptation to be distracted from the person in front of you because of everything else that's demanding your attention. However, the person that's in front of you right now is what's most important. So we need to cultivate this ability to accomplish a lot and maintain focus on the needs of each and every person we see as we go. A chief nursing officer with whom I once worked used the metaphor of a swimming duck to describe the work of her nurses. If you've ever seen a duck swimming in water, it looks like they're just gliding along effortlessly. However, a view from what's below the surface reveals feet working fast and hard to propel that duck forward. That's often the reality of a day's work in healthcare. Trying to remain calm and caring and get lots of stuff done. There are theological challenges that come up in the context of healthcare. One that's relatively common and I think very challenging is called theodicy. Now, theodicy is a $10 theological word that is used for what you might also more commonly hear referred to as the problem of evil. Terms rooted in a couple of Greek words meaning God and justice. It's also rooted in questions like, why do really bad things happen to really good people? The classic framing of the dilemma in theodicy is in 3 propositions. God is all loving. God is all powerful. And human evil and suffering exist. It's relatively easily to believe strongly in any 2 of those at one time. It becomes a bit more of a challenge to believe in all 3 at the same time in some life circumstances. For healthcare professionals of faith, this is not just an esoteric topic for discussion in a pub or a classroom somewhere. It's an issue of real and personal struggle. We see more than our fair share of human evil and suffering on some days. A thorough explanation of theodicy would require more time than we have this evening. But here's my brief take on the subject. It seems to me the overwhelming testimony of the Bible is that the highest purpose of human beings is to live in love relationship with God and each other. If you want the Reader's Digest version. Real love must be freely chosen, not coerced in any way. For this and other reasons, human beings have been given free will. The exercise of that free will leads to much love and other beauty and good in this world. But it also leads directly or indirectly to most of the evil and suffering that exists. So this leads sometimes to ethical dilemmas that arise in healthcare, in medicine. In their simplest form, these are examinations of the balance between, on the one hand, the burdens or harm, and on the other hand, the benefits or help that come from any particular medical treatment. Most medical interventions are a mix of help and harm. As a small illustration of that, I know vaccines have somehow become really controversial in the recent years, but just think about a vaccine, politics aside. All of us at the very least, if we get a vaccine, we're going to have some injection site discomfort. We're going to get stuck. We're going to get poked. Some of us may have flu-like symptoms or a little bit more complications for a few hours after that injection. Those are all forms of harm. Hopefully, what we get in return for that is protection from whatever disease we're being vaccinated against completely, or if we get it, a milder case that causes us less difficulties when it's all said and done. But that's illustrative of a lot of healthcare interventions. There's a little bit, hopefully, ideally, a little bit of harm, a whole lot of help. We want to always maximize the help and minimize the harm whenever possible. But medical advances and technology have the capability to both prolong life and to prolong death and suffering. We want to do the former as much as we can and the latter as little as possible. Many people, and perhaps some of you, are under the delusion that whenever we face an ethical dilemma in life, there will always be a right choice and a wrong choice, and we simply need to identify and choose the right choice. And maybe that's been your experience so far, but there are some situations in medicine wherein there is a bad choice and a worse choice, and it's very difficult to identify which is which. And I've seen people in very similar circumstances make very different choices, and yet both struggle with guilt afterwards because of the complexity of the dilemmas that they face. While walking with people of faith through such challenging dilemmas, I sometimes offer the following advice. First, gather as much relevant information to your decision as you can. Listen to what your treatment team is telling you about the treatment options, including all the potential benefits and risks, along with the likelihood of those. Do additional medical research if you want, but be careful to choose your sources wisely, trying to avoid those with strong bias. Consult with your support system, including persons who share your faith, spiritual advisors. Pray about the decision. And then do your very best to choose the most loving option. When Jesus was once asked what the greatest commandments were, he replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." I take it from this text and many others in the Bible that when competing interests are being considered, Jesus wants us to give love the top priority. There's still great mystery in the practice of medicine, despite all the advances that we made, particularly in the last 50 years in modern medicine. By the way, as it turns out, there's still great mystery in theology as well. When I was a young undergraduate religion major, I was pretty confident I would, with enough time and effort, answer most of my theological questions. After all, I was smart, a good student, committed, had a strong work ethic. What was to stop me? Well, among other things, my finitude, the infinity of God, and the complexity of life and human beings. I'm grateful for the answers I've found. I hold them with humility. I acknowledge there's some questions with multiple correct answers and some that cannot be answered in this life. But I will also say to you, from the front lines of modern medicine, there's mystery there as well. A lot of it is educated guesswork. And I say that with no disrespect. On the contrary, of great respect. It is educated. It is very well educated and comes from dedicated healthcare professionals. But all questions are not answered in medicine yet. Some may not be able to ever be answered. There are so many variables in human health. Genetics, social determinants of health, lifestyle decisions, nutrition, metabolism rates, environmental impacts on health, and on and on. I think both the practice of theology and the practice of medicine are best engaged with humility and awe and respect for the mystery that still exists in and around us. My next to the last observation, and this is an important one, is that if you want to do this work for the long haul, self-care is crucial. I've already mentioned workloads are heavy for most healthcare professionals. They're heavy in volume. They can also be heavy in mental and emotional toll that they take on a person, as well as physical toll. You're on your feet quite a bit. We deal with some very weighty human experiences. One piece of evidence for this is the data that, unfortunately, burnout and suicide rates among healthcare professionals are much higher than the general public. Along the way, we must both learn how to do the work and how to manage the work in a manner that is sustainable for each of us. With respect to Jesus' preparation for his vocation, the Gospels are mostly silent. We know almost nothing about how he invested his years between a brief appearance at the temple when he was at age 12 and the time right before he launched his public ministry at age 30. What was going on during all that time? One gospel has one verse that describes what was going on in that time. It's the Gospel of Luke. Perhaps not coincidentally, himself a physician, in addition to being a gospel writer. He seemed to recognize there was important and formative work going on for Jesus during those preparatory years. And he records in Luke 2:52 about these years in Jesus' life simply, "And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and with men." Perhaps taking care of ourselves mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and socially are key to not only surviving but thriving in a demanding vocation, as Jesus demonstrated. You're going to have to learn what fills your cup and arrange your life in such a way that you get regular doses of those things. Doing this is not neglect of your significant work responsibilities. On the contrary, it is part of being a mature and responsible healthcare professional. Both you and those you serve will reap the rewards of your self-care regimen. I'll close with a couple of personal stories, and then I'll take questions. A few months ago, my thoughtful wife of a little over 38 years asked me the question, if you had it to do over again, what would you do differently in your career? She has a life coaching practice these days, so she asks these kinds of questions of others a lot. I thought about it, and I told her I do not have any major regrets for my vocational path. There have been ups and downs. I've made mistakes, done some things right. There's been some pain, but much more joys and cause for gratitude. But I said my only minor regret is that I did not settle into being a healthcare chaplain sooner. Second story. I published a book a few years ago about the work of professional chaplains, and I opened the preface with this quote. Quote, "I would not want your job for anything in the world." End quote. I've actually had more than one person tell me that in my life. I don't take it personally. It's not really a thoughtful reflection on my work. It is instead an expression of the reality that my job has intersected with the worst experience in this person's life. And they are seeing my job through their current struggle. It fits me, this work. It is work that scratches where I itch. My favorite quote about vocation comes from Frederick Buechner, and he wrote, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's great hunger meet." I find the work of healthcare chaplaincy to be deeply fulfilling and meaningful. And I keep seeing evidence along the way that it's work that needs to be done. It makes a difference in the lives of others. Whatever your calling, I pray that you find the same. And with that, I'll stop and be glad to entertain any questions that you have. Right here, sir.
So, as a believer in Christ, I know we often have to go through situations where someone is at their worst situation.
Sure.
How would you deal with someone who is seeking Christ within a hospital, and saying like someone who hadn't believed in Christ up until then, they're looking for hope, they're seeking hope, and they ask you, the chaplain, how would you deal with that situation?
Yeah, so the first and most, for people who couldn't hear at the back, the question was, dealing with somebody in a difficult situation, struggling with that situation, asking deep spiritual questions, perhaps questions about faith in Christ or other questions. The first thing that we were trained to do as chaplains is to listen deeply to that other's experience and to make sure we fully understand what their experience has been, what their yearnings are, what their questions are, what they know at this point. I don't think that's bad advice for any healthcare professional in any role, to listen carefully. I could chase that rabbit for a while, but again, that time pressure between task and people often causes listening to get short-circuited in interactions between physicians and patients, nurses and patients, physical therapists and patients, social workers and patients, everybody. So that aside, begin by listening carefully and then work with them to help them to understand what is theirs to do right now with regard to faith in the midst of what they're dealing with. There's another question back here.
I have a question for you. I love your remarks about self-care, and I think that's something that the whole pandemic has really helped us see that we need
Yes.
to be better about.
Yeah.
And that says a lot, really, on the belief that my students that are here, they're the generation of nurses, they're defining what that looks like.
Yeah.
Actually taking a lunch break, actually going to the restroom.
Yes. Drinking water.
They're like, we're ready for 4
Yeah.
hours.
Yeah.
I believe all my blue crew here, there's a generation that's going to help change that.
Amen.
So thank you for that.
Jesus didn't say love others instead of yourself. He said love others as yourself.
So I kind of want to go to that and thoughts of self-care. What is your advice to any of these young people that are future healthcare providers about how they can use chaplaincy services in their own life in those moments where they can't get out and do whatever their self-care is? They're in the hospital.
Right.
Right now, snowstorm for 48 hours in the hospital.
Right.
How do they utilize chaplaincy services to better the patient's situation? Either or maybe both of those.
Yes.
A little bit about how your team's service can benefit my team.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And so, by the way, there were chaplains at every Memorial Hermann Hospital 48 hours straight, in-house, earlier this week, riding out that storm with everybody else as well. So the mission statement we crafted for ourselves as Memorial Hermann chaplains a few years ago, I'll use that as a starting point to answering your question, is that chaplains contribute to the well-being of patients, families, and healthcare professionals by providing care that engages their spiritual, emotional, and relational resources. We are available. We're right there in the thick of it, providing care to the same patients and families that you are. And so, and it is our privilege and responsibility to care for healthcare professionals as well. I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm going to continue to answer your question, but a little bit of secret. So my background is pediatrics. I was originally a staff chaplain at Children's Memorial Hermann. It was the context in which I worked. And I happened to have been the first full-time staff chaplain at Children's Memorial Hermann when I first started my career. So very early on in that work, I found the work caring for patients, children, and their families to be pretty meaningful. But I also knew about myself that I valued long-term relationships in ministry, like the over 25 years that I've known Scott. And I realized that those long-term relationships were going to come with my fellow healthcare professionals. A lot of providing care to patients and families is ministry to the parade. I mean, we had kids who were frequent flyers, and I developed long-term relationships with them over time, but the bulk of those patients and families I cared for a short time, and then they were gone. So I really began to be intentional about building relationships with nurses and physicians and social workers and child life specialists and physical therapists and occupational therapists and the people who clean the rooms and everybody else. That was selfish in some ways. I just got to confess that. It's something that was important to me. But I found that it was really rewarding. And from a ministry side of things, I always believed in this doctrine of that's called the priesthood of all believers, that we're all called to something. And a calling to clean a hospital room is no less sacred than a calling to preach on Sunday mornings. We all have the opportunity to be the vessels of Christ's love in this world, regardless of our role. What a privilege as a person called to ministry to not only reflect with people about their vocation on Sundays, but to see them do it, and to do it elbow to elbow with them, and to help them to deal with the struggles that come up in the midst of the laboratory of doing work and not in the reflection of the classroom on Sunday morning. You know, it's like, this is going on. And so we are available, and there is no charge to our service. And sometimes we're not only helping as hopefully a knowledgeable and skilled caregiver, but as someone who is struggling with the same thing you're struggling with, because we just saw it too. We just experienced it too. We're there in the trenches with healthcare professionals. So I do encourage you to reach out to your chaplains for support. It can be a challenge. You know, I mentioned everything's going on, a lot to do, but it's okay to step aside for a moment at the nurse's station or break room, or to otherwise take care of yourself. We have a program, you may have seen an article in the Sunday Chronicle last Sunday of 2024 about the increasing incidence of workplace violence for healthcare workers. And some friends of mine were quoted in that article that I've worked with for years, but there was also mention in there about a program at Memorial Hermann called Code Lilac. Code Lilac is a program our chaplains lead, but it's not just chaplains. We've trained over 400 healthcare professionals from throughout the system. Initially in a day-long training in emotional first aid, and then some ongoing continuing education, but these are healthcare professionals from every different background in healthcare who understand, in addition to the day-to-day stress that happens in healthcare, every once in a while you have one of those days that makes you really question your calling. And I hate to tell you that that day is coming, but for almost all of us, it will come someday. Well, you will just get knocked on your backside emotionally by what you just went through. And you start thinking, man, selling used cars sounds like a good idea. It happens to all of us. The way you get through those times is taking care of yourself and leaning on your colleagues. And so these Code Lilac peer responders are trained and on call and available to come when somebody has one of those kind of days and just give you a chance to step aside from your work responsibilities and to process that with somebody else who knows what it's like and help you to be able to regain your footing, to be able to get back into it. I'm sorry, I maybe talked a whole bunch. Did I answer all your questions, Brandon, or touch on what you were talking about? Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir. Not as much. We do tend to be more biased towards acute care settings, but there are chaplains who work in less acute healthcare. So we actually have a chaplain at University Place right over here between here and Memorial Hermann Southwest Hospital, which is not, really an acute care facility. And there are chaplains who work in a variety of healthcare contexts as well as in academic settings and corrections facilities and there are workplace chaplains. You may not know this, but Tyson Foods is a major employer of chaplains. Turns out, evidently, working in like chicken processing plants can be stressful too. And they have a whole fleet of trained chaplains that work there. They obviously don't care for patients and families like we do in healthcare. They just care for employees. So yeah, there are a variety of contexts in which chaplains are available, but the highest concentration is in healthcare and the military. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. Most all of our chaplains do. But these are interdisciplinary committees with representation from any discipline who has interest. The kind of core requirement to serve on an ethics committee is a strong passion for making sure we're doing the right thing for our patients and their families and a commitment to doing that work. So I have for 15 years served on the ethics committee at our Texas Medical Center Hospital, which, by the way, is the oldest hospital-based ethics committee in the state of Texas. There are regulatory requirements now, Joint Commission and others that require hospitals to have ethics committees, but we did it before anybody else in the state of Texas. It was then called Hermann Hospital, but it's what we now call Memorial Hermann Texas Medical Center because it was the right thing to do. All of our ethics committees within Memorial Hermann are chaired by a physician, and there are some good reasons for that that I won't chase at the moment. But like that committee I serve on at TMC, we have nurses and social workers. Somebody works in interpreter services. Somebody works in patient relations. Somebody from risk management. A variety of other physicians that besides the chair. And we also have community members who don't even work for Memorial Hermann, but bring that valuable outsider's perspective to some of these ethical dilemmas that we face. And in our context, anybody can reach out to the ethics committee for help. Sometimes there is urban myth that maybe you've encountered in your healthcare career that circulates that says only the physician can call the ethics committee. That's not true. Anybody can call for the ethics committee if they have concerns about what we're doing with a patient or family. I've seen parents back in my day, working in pediatrics, reach out to the ethics committee because they felt like that would be helpful to them to sort through the dilemmas they were facing with their child. But the person who delivers the tray to the room can reach out to the ethics committee if they have concerns. Anybody can reach out to the ethics committee. But they are interdisciplinary committees that are there to serve anybody who's struggling with an ethical dilemma in the hospital. Yes, sir. So that's a good question. I was not trying to get away from pediatrics. I try not to believe this. I was working in pediatrics, working at Children's Memorial Hermann, finding that very fulfilling work. And the previous director of the department at our medical center hospital died suddenly while on a medical mission trip to Africa. We still don't know really why. And so I was initially asked to become the interim director of the department there, and then later asked to stay in that role permanently. So I'd had some leadership experiences in my life in the past, but I wasn't really looking to move away from the bedside. In fact, I tried to keep bedside responsibility as much as I could in my early years as a director, but as the department grew, then I moved in more to a role of caring for, supporting, mentoring, training other chaplains to do the work, and less doing it myself personally. But the impetus was kind of a unique one for me. It wasn't something that I was looking to do at the time. It was something that was kind of thrust upon me. And by the way, the previous director was very much beloved by me and everybody else. And so I don't recommend moving into a leadership role that you don't want and that everybody else would rather have someone else, the previous person, continue to do it, which was kind of our reality. We loved Rick, We didn't, he was a great boss, We didn't feel like there was a need for change, but he died. And so that's how I made that transition. Yeah. This is for me, okay. I've touched on some of the things already, but one of the things when I was thinking this might be thing, again, I was having pretty good experiences working in church and loved working with college students. But one of the things I began to notice about myself is that I just really liked it whenever I had the occasion to have a conversation with somebody about something that really mattered to them. I mean, I could small talk with the best of them. I'm a former high school basketball player, and I can talk Rockets or other sports and things like that. But nothing ever brought me the kind of joy that when I got the opportunities. I had opportunities like that to do that in my church work. But I'd had the chance along the way to learn a little bit here and there about, from beginning when I was an undergrad, the church I attended as an undergrad, there was a professional healthcare chaplain that attended that church as well. And so I learned a little bit, there early on. And I'd had friends along the way. I began to suspect that I might have the opportunity to have more of those sort of deep conversations with people, the privilege to do that in a healthcare chaplaincy context than I did in a congregational setting. I had enough of them in the congregational setting to know that I like that. My hypothesis was correct. As it turns out, sometimes when people are really struggling with challenges in their life, they want to talk less about the Rockets and the Astros and more about the things that are just really important to them, as the first question kind of illustrated as well. So, and then again, like I mentioned, I love caring for healthcare professionals and working beside them, working alongside them. I love being challenged intellectually, and there's no shortage of that in medicine. I love working with a real well-educated workforce. I love being challenged emotionally. I mean, there are days, there have been days when it's like, gosh, I don't know if I can keep doing this, but I would rather have one of those days where I'm struggling emotionally, but go home with no doubt that I had a chance to make a difference, than to have some sort of easy day that I went home bored, And again, not every day is intense, but I recognize that some of those really intense experiences melted my butter, were things that, like I said, scratched where I itch. They fit who I was. And I would much rather have challenge and meaning than anything else out of my work. But the first clue was just picking up on this, hey, I got to have this really good conversation with so-and-so as they were talking about their vocation or their relationships or their struggles with God or whatever. But again, it was something of substance, and like, well, what a privilege to be able to do that with somebody. This warms my heart. If I could do more of this, that's what I'd want to do. And that was what sort of, and it felt like a leap, I had all this education, but you have to complete a year-long residency in a hospital setting to be a professional chaplain. I had a wife and 3 kids. We were a one-income family. It wasn't a big income, but it was one income. So part of the logistics had to do with my wife eventually finished her master's degree, went back to work outside the home as a high school guidance counselor, And so that gave a little finances, and so I could afford to make $23,000, which is what I made the year I was doing my residency. And we could get through that for me to be able to make the transition. But it still felt a bit like a leap of faith. I thought I had good reason to believe that this would be a good fit for me. I didn't know for sure until I made that decision and quit my church job and started my residency. But I did pretty early on discover it was a good fit for me. Yep. We do. We really prize taking care of each other. And that's another thing I love about the work, never had a group of coworkers that I felt like I cared more about or they cared more about me in any other setting of my life. Because we get it. We know it can be tough, and we do work on caring for each other. In our context, we all have to be board certified as chaplains, and that involves demonstrating the successful integration of 29 specific competencies into your practice. I won't go into that, but one of those competencies is self-care, because you have to be able to do it to sustain the work. I will say that among chaplains, burnout is relatively low, and turnover is relatively low. I mean, my 22 years, I'm not the longest tenured chaplain in Memorial Hermann. We have lots of people who work a long time in this work. Again, I get it. It's not a fit for everybody. Some people wouldn't take this job for anything in the world. But for those for whom it is an authentic expression of our calling, it is sustainable if we do the things, and I wasn't just blowing smoke, if we do the things to take care of ourselves, and you need to do those things too along the way. Some of the things that are good self-care for me have spiritual disciplines, prayer and study, and I'm active in my church. I also find being out in nature really good for me. I'm going camping tomorrow night. Weather's not going to be as nice as I hoped it was when I made these reservations a while back, but I'll be camping and hiking this weekend. I enjoy spending time out in nature. It's good self-care for me as well. I found, particularly when I was working at the bedside in really, really tough situations, sometimes seeing kids suffer and die. Some of them die because of what we euphemistically call non-accidental trauma. You may understand that that's what most of the world calls abuse. That sometimes I went home and I just craved watching comedy. I just needed to laugh, I needed to watch a sitcom or some funny movie or something that would get me to laugh. And that was good self-care for me. I like to walk. Scott mentioned we, years ago when our youngest graduated from high school, moved into the city to be closer to the medical center, and we live near Hermann Park. I love walking in Hermann Park. When I can't go camping, it's a beautiful place and just a few blocks from my house. So those are some.
Well, let's thank Brent for what he shared.